My wife mocked my military career. You chose the army over your family. She filed for divorce, demanded the house, my pension, and even tried to take our son away from me. My lawyer said, "Don't sign a thing." I looked at him and said, "Let her think she's winning." She walked into court smiling. Then the judge said one sentence, and she went pale. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. 22 years in the Army teaches a man a great many things, but the one that mattered most in the end was the simplest of all of them. You never let the enemy see you reading the map. Dawson Reed had learned that lesson in places he was not allowed to talk about, and he had carried it home with him the way he carried the ache in his lower back, quietly, without complaint, a permanent part of the equipment. He was a first sergeant, United States Army, retired, and he had given the service the whole of his adult life. 3 deployments, a knee that told him when the weather was turning, a set of personal standards that he had never once figured out how to lower, not for anyone, which had made him a very good soldier and, his wife liked to say near the end, an exhausting husband. When he finally hung up the uniform, Dawson did not go far. He settled in Clarksville, Tennessee, in the long, low sprawl outside the gates of Fort Campbell, in a town that runs on soldiers the way other towns run on a mill or a mine. And he took a job that surprised the men he'd served with. He became a JROTC instructor at the local high school. Every morning he put on a press shirt and stood in front of a room full of teenagers that half the world had already written off, and he taught them to stand up straight, to look a person in the eye, to fail at a thing, and then try it again without falling apart. It turned out to be the thing Dawson Reed was best at in the entire world. Not war. That. Standing in front of somebody nobody believed in and refusing to be the next person who gave up on them. He mentions all of this at the start, every time he tells it, for one reason. So that a person can understand the exact size and shape of the lie his wife told about him. Bianca stood up in a courtroom, under oath, and told a judge that Dawson Reed had chosen the Army over his own family. That he was never there. That he was cold and damaged, and that he loved the flag more than he had ever loved his own son. She said it in a soft, trembling voice, with her eyes shining and a tissue folded in her hand, and a good number of the people sitting in that gallery believed every word of it. They believed it because it is the story people already carry around in their heads about men like Dawson Reed, the broken veteran, the absent father, the soldier who couldn't come all the way home. And Bianca had always been extraordinarily good at telling people the exact story they already believed. The truth was that Dawson had been home. He coached his son Eli's rec league baseball, standing at third base in the heat, making signs the kids mostly ignored. He packed the boys' lunch every school morning, the crusts cut off because Eli was 9 and still particular about crusts. He was the parent at every single teacher conference, sitting in a too small chair with his notebook out, while Bianca was, in her words, at the gym. That gym is a thing worth coming back to, and Dawson will. But the truth, he had learned, does not matter much in the opening act of a story like this one. What matters at the start is that a woman looked at the man who had built the entire life she was standing inside of, and she decided that she could take all of it away from him. The house, the pension he had bled 22 years for, and their son, and that she could make him pay her, month after month, for the honor of having it done to him. She was wrong about nearly all of it, but Dawson Reed let her go on being wrong for a long, long time before he ever corrected her. That was the whole strategy. That was the war. The divorce papers were served to him on a Tuesday, at the school, in the front office, in front of 2 secretaries and a sophomore waiting on a late slip. That was a choice. A process server can be sent anywhere, and Bianca had sent this one to Dawson's place of work in the middle of the day so that the retired first sergeant would have to sign for the end of his marriage with an audience. She had wanted him embarrassed in front of his cadets. That single detail told Dawson more about the fight ahead than the paperwork did. A person who wants you humiliated more than they want you gone is a person who is not thinking clearly, and a person who is not thinking clearly makes mistakes. He filed that away. She did not simply want out of the marriage. She wanted everything in it. He read the filing that afternoon, alone, in the empty JROC classroom after the last cadet had gone home, and the building had gone quiet. She wanted the house. She wanted half of his military retirement pension. She wanted a cut of his VA disability compensation. She wanted permanent alimony, spousal support with no end date, on the grounds that she had sacrificed her own career for the family. And she wanted full physical and legal custody of Eli, with Dawson reduced to supervised visitation on the grounds. And this was written there in black ink in a legal document, that she had concerns about the boy's safety given his father's combat history. Combat history. She had taken the thing Dawson gave his country, the thing that woke him some nights and lived in his back and his knee and behind his eyes, and she had turned it into a weapon and pointed it at his child. Dawson read that line 3 times, and he waited for the heat to come, the red flood he'd have expected from any man reading those words about his own son. It did not come. What came instead was a thing he knew very well, an old familiar coldness, the flat and total focus that used to drop over him the moment a plan hit contact and everything went loud and sideways at once. It is the feeling where a man stops reacting and starts assessing, where the fear and the fury both go into a locked box, to be dealt with later, on his own time, and the mind clears and begins, very calmly, to work the problem. Because Dawson Reed already knew about Dax. Dax Renner was the man Bianca had been seeing for the better part of a year. Dawson had known for months. Loud car with a louder exhaust. Gold at the wrist and the throat. A great deal of talk secondhand about the moves Dax was making and the money coming any day now. Moves and money that never once seemed to require him to hold a job. Dawson had known that the gym was Dax Renner's apartment across the river. He had known, and he had said nothing and done nothing, and allowed his wife to go right on believing that he was the same oblivious, deployable, easily managed man she had married a decade before. Because a first sergeant knows, in his bones, that the single most dangerous thing a man can do is let the enemy see that he sees them before he is ready to move. Dawson hired a lawyer named Warren Diaz, on the recommendation of a retired sergeant major who'd been through his own bad divorce and come out with his pension intact. Warren was a quiet, unhurried man in his 50s who had handled a great many military divorces and who carried himself with the particular steadiness of a person who knows precisely how the game is rigged, and more importantly, precisely where it is not. He read Bianca's filing all the way through without a word. Then he set it down on the desk, squared it to the edge out of habit, and looked at his new client for a long moment. "First Sergeant," he said, "I'm going to tell you something that most men who sit in that chair do not understand, and it costs them everything. Your wife has filed the single greediest version of this case that a lawyer could draft. She believes a military pension is a piggy bank that she gets to walk in and smash in half. She believes your VA disability is money on the table. She believes permanent alimony is something a judge just hands out to the wife. She is wrong about most of it, and I can prove she's wrong." He leaned forward, and his voice dropped a little. "So here is my advice, and it is the opposite of what your gut is screaming at you right now. Do not sign a thing. Do not negotiate. Do not counter. And whatever you do, do not warn her or her lawyer about a single one of the things they've gotten wrong." Dawson looked at him across the desk for a long moment. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop and pulled away. And then Dawson Reed said the sentence that decided the entire war. "Let her think she's winning." Warren tilted his head, just slightly, the way a man does when he's realized the person across from him is playing a longer game than expected. "If we tell her lawyer the pension is protected," Dawson said, "she gets careful. She scales the demands back. She takes a reasonable settlement. She keeps custody of my son, and she moves him across the country to wherever Dax Renner's next big move takes them, somewhere I can't get to him, somewhere I can't watch." He paused, and there it was, the thing he had not yet told Warren, the thing about Eli sitting behind his sternum like a swallowed stone. "I do not want her careful, Mr. Diaz. I want her confident. I want her to walk into that courtroom absolutely certain that she has already won. I want her to file every single lie she can think of and swear to all of them, because the bigger the case a person builds on top of a lie, the harder the whole thing comes down when the truth finally hits it. So let her build it, as high as she wants. Let her keep believing I'm the same beaten-down soldier she's been laughing at for a year." Warren was quiet for a second or two. Then he reached into his drawer, took out a fresh yellow legal pad, and clicked his pen. "All right," he said. "Then we don't fight the divorce. Not yet. We prepare the ground, and we let them charge across it. Tell me everything you have." He looked up, and First Sergeant, start with whatever it is about your boy that you walked in here carrying and haven't said out loud yet. It's all over your face. So Dawson told him. 2 Saturdays before, on Dawson's scheduled visitation, Eli had been quiet. That does not sound like much, put into words, but Dawson's son was not a quiet child. Eli Reed narrated his entire existence out loud. The baseball and the video games and the chameleon he wanted and the plot of every show, an exhausting, joyful, run-on detail, the way Dawson himself had before 2 decades of soldiering trained the extra words out of him. Quiet, on Eli, was an alarm. That Saturday the boy had been folded up small in the corner of Dawson's couch, knees to his chest, watching the door more than the television. And when Dawson sat down beside him, careful and slow, not crowding him, Eli had, without a single word, reached over and pushed up the sleeve of his own shirt and shown his father the bruise on his upper arm. It was the shape of a grown man's hand, for fingers and the round print of a thumb, gone the deep green-purple of a few days old. "Don't be mad at Mom," Eli had said, fast, the words tumbling over each other before Dawson could make his face do anything at all. "Dax was just teaching me. He says I'm too soft. Please, Dad. Please don't make Mom mad about it. It just makes it worse when you make Mom mad. Please don't make Mom mad. It makes it worse." Dawson Reed had been shotted on 3 continents. He had carried men who did not make it to the aid station. He had folded a flag into a triangle and handed it to a mother. And he will tell you plainly that he has never in his life had to work as hard at anything as he worked, on that couch, at keeping his own face calm and easy and safe, so that his 9-year-old son would not be frightened by the thing that was moving through his father like a slow avalanche. Because that was the exact moment the mission changed shape. A divorce is a thing a reasonable man can be reasonable about. Property gets divided. Feelings get bruised. People move on. Dawson had been fully prepared to be reasonable about the end of his marriage, right up until that Saturday afternoon. But a grown man putting his hands on Dawson's 9-year-old boy, to teach him not to be soft, while that boy's own mother stood by and permitted it and coached the child into silence about it. That was not a thing Dawson Reed was going to be reasonable about, in this life or in any life that came after it. And here is the part he needs people to understand, because it is the part that saved his son. He did not drive across the river to Dax Renner's apartment that night. Every instinct he owned, every ounce of the training and the temper and the pure animal fatherhood in him, screamed to get in the truck and go and end it. He did not go, because a man who reacts, a man who shows up at that apartment and does the thing his hands wanted to do, is a man who hands the system a violent, unstable veteran and loses his son forever. And Dawson was not going to lose Eli to make himself feel better for one single night. He had spent his whole career learning to hold the trigger. He held it now, when it counted more than it had ever counted in any war. Instead, he did the disciplined thing, the cold and patient and useful thing. He documented it. He photographed the bruise, dated in good light. He took Eli quietly to a pediatrician he trusted, who examined the boy gently and found not 1 mark but 3, the newest one and 2 older ones fading underneath it, and who wrote every bit of it down in a medical chart in clinical language, because a doctor's chart is not the bitter testimony of a jealous ex-husband. It is evidence, and in the course of that, Dawson learned a thing he had not known, that Eli's school counselor had already filed a report, weeks earlier, entirely on her own, about a bright and talkative boy who had gone withdrawn and flinching, who had stopped raising his hand, who guarded his own arms when a teacher moved too fast. It was already in the system, independent of Dawson. Official. Dated. Waiting. Warren Diaz built the rest of the case the way an old infantryman builds a firing position. Slowly, out of sight, everything measured and ranged and prepared, long before anyone pulls a trigger. The pension came first. Under federal law, Dawson's VA disability compensation could not be divided in a divorce at all, not $1 of it, no matter what any state judge might want. And the military retirement pay itself came with a thicket of rules that Bianca's lawyer either did not fully understand or was gambling that Dawson did not. The direct payment threshold, the marital fraction formula, and the plain fact that in the state of Tennessee, a spouse's own misconduct is a thing a court is allowed to weigh. Bianca was demanding a share of money that was, in large part, simply not hers to take under the law. And Warren and Dawson let her go right on demanding it, in writing loudly. The house came next. Dawson had bought it with a VA loan 2 years before he ever met Bianca. It was, in the clean language of the law, separate property. It had never been hers, not for one day of the marriage. And they let her keep listing it at the top of everything she meant to take. The alimony was the sweetest of all, and they breathed not a word about it. Bianca was petitioning the court for permanent spousal support as a faithful, sacrificing, wronged wife. And Dax Renner had, by then, been living in Dawson's house with her for 4 months. Cohabitation. In Tennessee, a supported spouse living with a new partner is grounds to reduce or entirely terminate alimony. Every single night that man slept in the bed Dawson used to sleep in was another nail driven into Bianca's own case. And she and Dax were hammering them in themselves, cheerfully, and all Dawson had to do was let the doorbell camera keep its patient record and note the dates. The sacrifice career was a lie with a paper trail. Bianca had sworn, in her financial disclosure to the court, under penalty of perjury, that she had no income of her own. She had in fact been running a cash side business for better than 2 years, one she had carefully hidden from the household finances the entire time. That is not merely a secret between spouses. Sworn to a court, it is fraud. It is a crime with a name. And then there was Eli and the camera. The doorbell camera mounted on the front porch of the house Bianca now shared with her boyfriend was a camera Dawson had installed himself, years earlier, on his own account, and which Bianca had long ago stopped thinking about at all. It had never stopped watching, and it had caught things. It had caught Dax Renner taking Dawson's son by the arm, in that same grip, and marching him inside. It had caught the man's raised voice through the open door. And it had caught Bianca, standing right there in that doorway, watching it happen and doing nothing at all to stop it. All of it time-stamped, all of it streaming, quietly, every night, to a father who watched each new clip alone in his kitchen with his jaw set so hard his teeth ached, and then went and photographed his sleeping son's bruises and said nothing and waited. "You understand what we're holding," Warren said one evening, when the whole of it lay spread across his conference table in labeled folders. "This is not a divorce anymore. First Sergeant, we have a custody case, we have a criminal case, and we have a woman who is about to stand up in front of a judge and commit perjury, on the record, under oath, because she has no earthly idea that any single one of these folders exists." He looked at Dawson over his glasses. "I'll say this once because it's my job to. You could end this tomorrow. You could take half of what's in these folders to her lawyer, and she'd fold within the hour, and you'd have your son and your house and your pension by the end of the week. Why are you waiting? Why put your boy through a hearing at all?" Dawson was quiet for a moment. "Because a settlement is a thing she walks away from," he said finally. "She signs a paper, she keeps her freedom, she tells everyone she was railroaded by a vindictive vet, and in a year she's doing it to somebody else's family. I don't want her to walk away from it. I want it on the record. I want her to stand up in an open courtroom and say every lie out loud, under oath, in front of a judge first. Because a lie you settle is an argument. A lie you swear to on the stand is a sentence." He looked at the folder with his son's name on it. "She used my boy to try to take everything. I'm going to make sure the record shows exactly who she is. All the way. On paper. Forever." Warren looked at him a long moment, and then he nodded and closed the folder. Dax Renner came looking for Dawson 1 week before the hearing. He caught him in the high school parking lot in the late afternoon, after the last cadet had gone home and the lot had mostly emptied out. Dax had 2 friends waiting in his loud car, and he had brought with him a great deal of mouth. He wanted, he said, to talk about how things were going to go from here on. He told Dawson he'd be living in his house, raising his boy, spending his money. He called Dawson a broke-down soldier and a relic and a man whose best days had been wasted in a war that nobody even remembered. He walked right up into Dawson's space, close enough that Dawson could smell the cologne coming off him in waves, and he put a flat hand on Dawson's chest and shoved him backward a step. He should not have put his hands on Dawson Reed. Dawson is honest about this part, the same way he is honest with his cadets when they ask him about the things he's seen. He did not want to hurt Dax Renner. He had spent a career learning that a man who needs to prove himself with his fists is a man who has already lost the argument. But Dax was not interested in the argument. Dax wound up, and threw the first punch, a wide, looping telegraph thing that a man could see coming from across the county, and 22 years of training does not politely excuse itself from a man's hands just because he has retired. It was over in about 4 seconds. Dax Renner spent the remainder of that conversation on the warm asphalt of the parking lot, and his two friends, watching from the car, made the single wise decision available to them that day, which was to stay in the car. And then Dawson Reed did the thing that separates a soldier from a brawler, the thing that mattered more than the 4 seconds that came before it. He stepped back. He put his open hands up where anyone could see them. He took out his phone and he called the police himself, and he stood there in the empty lot and waited for them to arrive, because that high school parking lot is covered end to end by security cameras, and those cameras had recorded, in clean daylight, exactly who had shoved and exactly who had swung first. Dax Renner, it emerged when the officers ran him, had a record, a prior assault charge, and a few other things besides. He was arrested that same afternoon, and the tough guy performance drained out of him the instant the handcuffs became real, the way it always does with men who mistake volume for strength. He had driven across town to intimidate the relic. He had instead handed the relic a witnessed, filmed, unprovoked assault charge 7 days before they all walked into court. The custody and divorce hearing came before the Honorable Adrian Coyle, a judge with 2 decades on the family bench and a pair of reading glasses she looked at people over the top of, and eyes that had very plainly watched every kind of performance a frightened, guilty, or grieving human being can put on in a courtroom. Bianca walked in smiling. That is the detail Dawson has never been able to let go of and never will. His wife walked into that courtroom radiant and certain, already spending the money in her head, already living the life. She wore soft, muted colors and no jewelry, and she had her sad, brave, wounded expression pressed and ready like a good uniform. She thought she had come to collect. She smiled at her lawyer. She smiled, faintly and bravely, at the gallery. She had, Dawson understood, no idea at all that she was walking into anything but her own coronation. She testified first, and Dawson will grant her this, fully and without bitterness. She was magnificent. She was a devoted mother who had given up everything she was for her family. She was the abandoned wife of a hard, cold man who had chosen the army over her, over his own little boy, again and again, deployment after deployment. She dabbed at her eyes at precisely the right moments, never too much. She spoke, her voice cracking on cue, about her deep and genuine fear for Eli's safety in the care of a father carrying combat trauma he had never properly dealt with. She swore she had no income, that she had sacrificed her career on the altar of this family, that she needed the house and the support simply to give her son a stable place to stand. She turned to the judge, at the end, and asked her, mother to woman, to please protect her little boy from his own father. Dawson sat perfectly still through every word of it. Warren had told him what to do, and he did it with the discipline of a man who had stood at parade rest through long, hot ceremonies. Do not react. Do not shake your head. Do not let one thing show on your face. Let her build the whole tower, brick by brick, as high as she is willing to stack it. She stacked it very, very high. And then Warren Diaz stood up, and he was not loud, and he was in no hurry whatsoever, and he took her tower down one brick at a time. He entered the doorbell footage into evidence first. Bianca's own front porch, her own camera, or rather Dawson's camera that she had forgotten was his. He played the clip of Dax Renner's hand closing on the boy's arm in that grip, and Eli's small face, and Dax's voice, and Bianca standing there in the warm light of the doorway, watching her son be handled, and turning to go back inside. He entered the pediatric report and the photographs of the 3 bruises, the new one and the 2 fading underneath. He entered the school counselor's filing, and he made very certain the court noted its date, weeks before Dawson had ever filed for divorce, so that no one in that room could stand up and call it a tactic. He entered the summary of the forensic interview, in which a 9-year-old boy, in a soft carpeted room with a trained and gentle stranger, had explained in his own small voice why he never told anyone, because please don't make mom mad, it just makes it worse. Then Warren turned to the money, and his voice never changed, and that was somehow the most frightening thing of all. He entered proof of the cash business that Bianca had sworn, under penalty of perjury, in a document with her signature at the bottom, did not exist, which meant that her sworn financial disclosure to this court was a felony sitting in the file. He entered 4 months of dated evidence that Dax Renner had been residing in the very house Bianca was demanding, cohabitating, which meant that her petition for permanent alimony was dead where it lay. And he reminded the court, gently, almost as an afterthought, that the VA disability compensation she sought to divide was protected from division by federal law, and that the house she was demanding had been the husband's separate property since 2 years before the marriage began. Dawson watched his wife's face for the whole of it, because he had earned the right to. He watched the smile go first, sliding off all at once. Then he watched the color follow it, the blood draining down out of her cheeks. And then he watched the story she had been telling herself for a solid year. The story in which she was the clever one and Dawson Reed was the slow, broken, manageable relic, come apart behind her eyes in real time, brick by brick, as fast as Warren laid the evidence down. Judge Coyle listened to all of it without a single word or expression. She watched the doorbell footage through twice, the second time with her glasses off. She read the counselor's report, and when it was finished and the courtroom had gone entirely silent, she set her glasses down on the bench and she looked at Bianca Reed for a long, level moment, and she said one sentence. "Ms. Reed, physical custody of the minor child is awarded to his father. And this court is referring your testimony and your sworn financial disclosure to the district attorney's office." Bianca went pale, all the way pale, in an instant, the blood dropping out of her face like a stage curtain coming down at the end of a show, because she understood, in the space of that one sentence, what had actually just happened to her. She had not lost a divorce. She had, in open court, under oath on the record, confessed to a crime. The rest was consequence, and the consequence was thorough and it was heavy. Bianca was charged with perjury for the things she swore to on that stand. She was charged with making a false financial disclosure to the court. And she was charged, most seriously of all, with child endangerment for what her own front porch camera showed her standing in a doorway and allowing to be done to her son, more than once, and coaching him to hide. Lying under oath to a judge in order to steal a good man's child, while that child was being hurt beneath her own roof, is not a bitter divorce that got out of hand. It is a criminal case, and it carries real time, and she served it. The devoted mother performance she had worked so hard on did not survive her own doorway, being played back on a courtroom screen in front of the woman she'd been trying to fool. Dax Renner went down harder still. The parking lot assault, caught clean on the school's cameras, stacked on top of his prior record, stacked on top of the child abuse charges the doorbell footage handed the prosecutors, sent him away for a long stretch of years. And the very moment his own freedom was genuinely on the line, the gangster act that he'd worn like a costume evaporated completely. He gave a full statement throwing Bianca under the bus to try to save himself, naming her, detailing what she'd known and allowed, which only deepened the hole she was already standing in. And then he was gone, out of Dawson's life and out of Eli's, into a cell, and neither of them has spent a minute thinking about him since. The divorce itself took about 20 minutes once the criminal referrals were made. The house stayed Dawson's, because it had always, from the very first day, been his. The pension and the VA disability stayed his, because federal law said they were his, and no smiling, tearful lie in a soft sweater could change what federal law said. The alimony petition was denied in a single dry line, with a citation to the 4 months another man had slept in the bed she'd wanted Dawson to keep paying for. She had walked into that courtroom to take everything Dawson Reed had built across a lifetime. She walked out of it with a court date and a public defender, and nowhere left to go. And Dawson got his son. Eli lives with his father now, full custody, in the house Dawson bought 2 years before either the boy or his mother had entered his life. He is 10 years old. It was not instant, and Dawson will not pretend that it was, because pretending would dishonor how hard the boy worked. There were nights in the beginning when Eli flinched at a raised voice on the television, when he asked, small and careful and guarding his own arms, whether he had done something wrong, whether Dad was going to be mad. They found a counselor. They still go, some weeks, and Dawson has made his peace with a truth he learned the hard way, which is that healing a boy back to himself takes a great deal longer than it took to frighten him, and that the work is worth every single hour of it. But the flinch is nearly gone now. Eli narrates his whole life out loud again. The baseball and the chameleon he finally got and named General, and the plot of every show in loving, exhausting, unbroken detail, and Dawson Reed has come to love the noise of his son more than he has ever loved quiet in all his life. Last week, Dawson taught the boy how to shine a pair of boots and lace them the way the Army had taught him, square and tight, the laces even and the ends tucked. Eli had wanted to learn it of his own accord because his old man did it every single morning at the kitchen counter, and the boy had started watching. So he sat on the kitchen floor with his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, working at the laces, getting them wrong, pulling them out, trying again, and Dawson crouched down on his bad knee beside him and fixed the loop and told him, quietly, to try it once more. "Dad," Eli said suddenly, not looking up from the boot, in the offhand way children ask the enormous questions. "Was Mom right? That you picked the Army instead of us?" Dawson took a moment with that one. He turned it over, the way he turned over everything now, weighing how much of the truth a 10-year-old's hands could hold. "The Army taught me one thing, buddy, over all the years," he said at last. "It taught me that you never leave your people behind. Not ever. Not on the worst day. Not when it's hard. Not when it costs you something. That's the whole job, when you get right down under it. That's the only rule that matters." He pulled the boy's lace tight and squared the loop. "So no, I didn't pick the Army instead of you. I picked you the exact way the Army taught me to pick people. All the way, no matter what it costs. That's the only way I know how to pick anybody." Eli thought about that for a moment, turning it over the way his father did. Then he nodded, satisfied, the way a child nods when the world has quietly clicked back into a shape that makes sense. And he went back to his boot. Bianca had stood up in a full courtroom and sworn that Dawson Reed chose the uniform over his own family. The truth, the whole truth, is that the uniform is the only reason he ever knew how to fight for them at all.